Going on, everyone. Been seeing some kind of chats on some of the Facebook groups that I'm on about engine cooling. Obviously, motorsport wise, engine cooling's a massive thing. It can be quite hard to do. It can be quite hard to make effective. So I thought do something a bit different this week, and I might take you guys for a bit of a tour through what I've actually done on the 34 for the engine cooling. It's taken, I think probably we're on about the third or fourth version of setup, but these days were pretty good. Earlier in the year we had a 40 odd degree day that we were at the track, Celsius, so quite hot, and we were sticking in the like mid 90 degree engine temps. So I feel like we've got a pretty good setup, pretty reliable. It has taken a while, but we have got there in the end. I do plan on making a couple of other changes, not so much for cooling improvement, but more so in relation to just reliability, serviceability, all of that. So we're getting in the intro and then we'll take you for a wander through. Cheers. Alright, so bit of a show and tell. Our cooling system, we obviously run an inlet. That inlet from a side view you can see opens up into our intercooler, then through into our radiator. Radiator passes partially through the oil cooler and then out. So that comes out through the bonnet. Now, bonnet opening has a little gurney flap on it. That's one of the changes that we made fairly early on. What we think was happening was air was kind of coming over the bonnet and then running over, and it was working, but it just seemed to be struggling. We just tried that gurney flap, and what that does is that puts a kick up on the air here, which seems to help pull that air out. Our first version, we had this here made out of fiberglass. Now that worked pretty well, but the main issue was at the back here where it meets up with the intercooler, it would actually end up flexing down in the middle section there and let air pass through. We had obviously the GoPro that we've got that faced the wheel for the nice spectacular shot. We actually turned the GoPro and faced it in to see what was going on, and at kind of that 200k an hour it was wide open. You could see air rushing past, so we knew we weren't getting that full flow through there. In regards to what we've got, so the radiator is actually an XJ Jeep radiator. Nothing fancy, it's literally just an eBay special. I've cut the tanks up, put our inlets and outlets on the tank. I think over here it used to have one of the stock Jeep fittings coming off that I've capped. But yeah, so going into the kind of math side of it, our current core is 780 by 280, which works out to 2184 square centimeters. Now, I was always kind of wary about getting the size similar to stock. So the stock size is 650 by 400, which equates to 2,600 square centimeters. So we are slightly smaller, which is kind of interesting that even though we are a bit smaller, we still seem to have good cooling. Now, the inlet. So the inlet is 600 by 150, which is 900 square centimeters. Now, the general rule, which is this size here, the general rule that I've found is you want a third of your radiator core to be your air inlet. And what that does is that stops a real high pressure on the front side of your radiator, which then means that no air will go through. So we are over that. So the 1/3 rule would mean that it's 733 square centimeters in size. Obviously, us being 900, I made it slightly larger because we have an intercooler as well. So that rule there I found was kind of NA stuff where it was radiator only. But in saying that, we've put this light bar in here, which has taken out a good chunk, and it hasn't actually changed the cooling. We do mainly run that light bar on at night, so nighttime it's already going to be a bit cooler. But that 1/3 rule seems to be kind of what most people say. It seems to be kind of what the time attack guys go for your inlet. And then your outlet you want to be, I think it's about the same. I think it's about 1/3 larger than your core. So our outlet is 2560 square centimeters. Our category does have a maximum of 3200. So we've just had to make sure we stick in that, keeping to that larger outlet size means that you've got everywhere you want to start making lower pressure, because air wants to go to the lower pressure area. So if you choke this outlet up to be the same size as your inlet, you're gonna have kind of an equal pressure, which means that you're gonna have stagnant air. So the radiator sizing seems to be working with the inlets and outlets. Like I said, we do have a plan to change. That's just an eBay special radiator. From everything I've heard, your PWRs are like 30% more efficient. So we're tossing up to go a PWR or something of that nature. The other option we've got, so that just removes for servicing and getting to stuff. This is our oil cooler. So everything I've read and seem to be able to back up by trends is that your oil and your coolant temperature both match each other fairly well. I don't know how true it is, but I've been told that more cooling is done from your oil than is done by your radiator. Like I said, I don't know how true that is, but something I've been told. We're going to change the oil cooler this year when we go to the dry sump. So that's happening pretty much probably as this video is coming out. We'll be sorting out the dry sump system. So we've actually got an oil cooler core that is half the width of the radiator, full length. So what I've been toying with the idea of is this radiator here struggled at first. One of the other changes that we made was I put a divider in here. So it's now a dual pass. So water comes in, it's got to run through half of the core, turn, come down and run back through the other part of the core. Initially, under low RPM, it was just circulating here and it would overheat. You really had to be up like 4, 5, 6,000 RPM for it to actually run the full width of the core. So that's probably the biggest thing with the radiator side of things, is making sure that you've got that 1/3 in, 1/3 larger on the out. And if you do that, it would appear that even having a smaller surface area of radiator, we're keeping up with the cooling. And this is making 450, 500 kilowatts, something like that these days. I think 450 kilowatts. So that's a good amount of power. aside from the radiator, the big improvement we made was actually this. So this is pretty different on a RB. Most of the time, all of your water fittings from underneath come to like one common manifold here and then go into your radiator. What I always found was that we always seem to get steam or whatever in the top of the motor. So what we've done here, I should have unplugged all this. Give me 2 secs. I'll should be able to move this fairly quickly. What we've done is we've run all of the give me 2 secs. We've run all of the coolant up. So instead of it all running horizontal, everything's got to flow up, because as we all know, air will flow up. So by doing that, it runs up into this common leg, this one here. From there, it's actually offset into this. So I noticed that a few cars, I think HKS or someone, they actually make like a radiator swirl pot steam thing. I'll see if I can find a photo and I'll put a photo in. But what that does is that basically takes the steam and sends it into a pot that you can put at your highest point. And then it normally had a drain line underneath that went back to the radiator. So this to me is effectively doing the same thing. It comes in on the side, and when you start picking up RPM, you actually watch this swirl. And when it swirls, if a bubble comes in, the water being heavier goes to the outside, the bubble comes to the center, and the bubble comes up. So by having this as a fairly small diameter but tall, no air will ever make it down to go back into the radiator. So we've just, when we did this, we pretty much eliminated the issue that I was ever having of air getting into the system. The other benefit of this is it's a high point of the motor. So by running all of the water up out of the head, heat or hot water rises. So hot water automatically wants to rise out of the head and run into that and then run along. I think that's probably been a game changer, setting that up, building that, making that work. From there, we never had any more airlock issues. The air just bleeds itself out nicely. That there runs to that tank. That tank is too small. We've constantly got that kind of burping out. I can't remember. I think it's 20% of your coolant volume you need to have as your tank, as your expansion tank. So that there, we don't have like an expansion tank here. This is normally chockers. So that needs to act as our expansion tank. So normally that's only got a little bit in the bottom just to suck itself back in. I'm gonna make that bigger. So with the dry sump, we're gonna get rid of our catch can, puke tank, whatever you wanna call it. And we're gonna make that whole unit there the coolant overflow or expansion tank. There's so many different names for it, I get confused at times. But that there, I reckon then we should be on the money and not having any more cooling issues in relation to kind of, not so much cooling issues. We shouldn't be pushing coolant out of the system when it gets hot. That there, what else? Probably the turbo. So one thing with turbos, well, as I said before, hot water rises. So when you do the turbo, I've got the turbo clocked around a little bit so that this is our water outfitting, and our water infitting comes in from down low. You can kind of see it maybe through there. Our water in comes from low, goes out, and then this goes directly back to this line. So the hot water out of the turbo never goes back into the motor. Normally on a stock application, this would head back down and then go back into the motor. To me, that's just going to then cause an air pocket or an airlock in the turbo outline. So this here, if it does create steam because it's getting hot, it's going to go straight back into that, and it's just purge that out the system. The other big change that we made when we were at Ample last, take that off, is we noticed that this was black anodized, and it's now, I don't know, I'm colorblind. It's a funky color. It's definitely not black anymore. It's been torched by the heat. So we've run just -4 water lines to it. So our water into the turbo, we've just got a little -4 line that comes in, and once again it goes to the bottom of the wastegate. Once again, that hot water is going to want to rise, come out, and then it just meets back up with the turbo outline. So anything that runs through this, from what I've read, it doesn't need a huge amount, it just needs a little bit. So that there should be feeding the wastegate pretty well with coolish water. At least it's going to be some improvement over no water. I think that's probably most of the cooling system on this. Make sure that your radiator inlet and your outlets are sized appropriately to your core size. Put a little bit on your inlet if you do have extra stuff like intercooler, oil coolers, all of that. At the end of the day, it's a lot easier to throw some, my thought here was, if it was too large, is we could throw some like stone guard over it, because that'll effectively take out, I think you can get it in percentages, so you can get like a 10% block out. So my thought was that we could try something like that. We never bothered with that. We just ran gaff tape across it and choked it down to see if we had any improvement, and the gaff tape across here just ended up making it worse. So we kind of went, well, I think we've got the right size, we'll leave it there. Coolant routing, that's probably another big one. Make sure that you do have way for steam to get out. My other thought with the RB heads was, you can't see it, but under here there are like Welsh plugs all tapped into the head. My thought was to make a steam manifold out of them, but when you look at a bare head, these lines here that run into the manifold, they're not too bad on height. So I don't think that there is a whole lot of steam gathering up the top there. We certainly haven't seen any issues with it in the past that would kind of relate to heat being an issue. Yeah, if you've got any questions, like I said, hit us up. Might be able to help you out, might be able to kind of give you a few pointers, steer in the right direction. But for us, it's just been a learning curve. Like I said, we're not too sure what happened there, but GoPro wigged out. Yeah, hopefully this might be able to give you some ideas of stuff to try. But yeah, it really is just a suck it and see, have a go. But like I said, if you want to know anything about what we've done, shout out. There seem to be plenty of RBs going around making good power. I don't know, I know most of them are kind of time attack. Well, I know the ones that I know are time attack, and they still have kind of cooling gremlins, but they're also pushing 1500 horsepower. So the more power you make, the more cooling you need. So that's why I'm thinking about doing the extra portion of the radiator, a bit more coolant volume, a bit more cooling capacity, with the extra power that we're pushing now. But we do seem to be on the money pretty well these days. So cheers for watching, bit of a different one this week. I hope you guys enjoy. Cheers, bye.